Hello and welcome to the Corporate Facility Council's webinar, FM in the Age of Artificial Intelligence and Automation, presented by Dr. Dean Teshawagi, PhD, PE, and IFMA Fellow. I do want to let everyone know that they have been muted for audio quality and that this webinar is being recorded. If you have any questions during the webinar, please feel free to type them into the question box on your control panel, and we'll go over them during the Q&A portion at the end of the webinar. This recording, as well as other past CFC webinars, are available on ifmacfc.org. And again, that's ifmacfc.org. At this time, I'm happy to turn it over to Wayne, the Council Secretary. Wayne, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Joshua. Hi, everyone. Once again, the Corporate Facilities Council is bringing a very exciting speaker, someone who I've heard speak on numerous occasions and have always left with a lot of knowledge and a lot of insight on things I didn't know. So that makes for a great speaker. Many of you may have seen Dr. Dean at World Workplace or on his YouTube channel. I encourage you to really explore some of his content online. There's a lot of great video clips there that can kind of round out this universe of best value that Dr. Dean has created. I also want to mention that the Corporate Facilities Council is your place for O&M. If you have any questions or would like to network with your peers in the corporate arena of FM, we are the place. And just like most of the councils, you can join for a very small amount of money. I believe it's still $55. And that gives you access to all of our content and access to all of our membership to interact with them. So I encourage you to take a look at that, our magazine facility, as well as our website with archived content. And with that, I would like to turn it over to Dr. Dean.
Good morning, everyone, wherever you are. So happy to be here. Now, this presentation goes along with my method of presentation to try to make it as simple as possible, and hopefully it will intrigue you and lead you on to practice new things and look into the future. FM in the age of artificial intelligence and automation. My simple observations over the past 30 years of attending IFMA meetings is that FM professionals somehow need to be a part of the C-suite. Not on the outside, not close to, but a part of the C-suite. And FM associates need to be technical experts in what they do. The future of FM professionals, where does it lie? Simply put, the FM professionals need to add dominant value. They need more responsibility, but they need less work. Somehow, to get into the C-suite, they need to change the way they communicate and what they talk about and what they do. They need to be aligned with the owner of the organization that is, quote, owning the facility or doing, quote, the production in the facility. The FM associates need to become the technical experts. They need to use performance metrics. They should be the ones to have the technical education and not the FM professionals. This is a definite paradigm shift. The age of automation. What is automation? Automation to most people is the automating of functions previously carried out by humans. This is what most people think of when they think of automation. Well, let's look at what must be done if we are to add efficiency and value to the FM services being delivered. If we can change the order of events in any way, which is what an expert would do to, quote, become efficient. Of course, any duplication of effort should be cut out. Any management, direction, and control, anyone watching to see if the other party actually was doing what they're supposed to be doing. If you think about it, this is what automation does. When automation takes over, nobody needs to inspect somebody else because it's automated. Of course, we need to minimize rework. Rework should never happen. We should also minimize communications and documentation in the communication, in the management, direction, and control of the vendors by the FM professional. And common sense tells us we need to lower the costs and minimize the number of people needed to actually deliver the service. So in actuality, when we look at the FM professional, we need to increase their responsibility, but minimize their work. This is how the FM professional will add more value. The first thing that we have to deal with is, what is an expert? An expert does several things. But the first thing that an expert can do is they can always tell the difference. They can tell the difference between my left hand and my right hand. They can tell the difference between what an expert does and what a non-expert does. They can tell the difference of the initial conditions that they're taking over and what they're going to do to improve those conditions to end up with optimized final conditions. They can tell the difference. And because they can tell the difference between entities, vendors, and they can see into the future because they know how they will change the initial conditions to the final conditions, which is what they are going to provide, how they're going to improve the services. And the third thing that experts can do, this is something that nobody likes to talk about, but when the expert truly is an expert and they can see into the future, they can understand all the stakeholders, they quickly understand that the majority of stakeholders can't tell the difference, can't see into the future. In fact, the majority of stakeholders don't even know the value of the expert. And if the expert vendor doesn't do this one thing, no one will appreciate the vendor services. And it is that they can take something complicated, they can take a lot of detail, they can take everything it takes to see into the future on their service and how they're making it better. And they can make it simple. Because if they can't make it simple, the other stakeholders, the owners' representatives, the technical people, professional people, they won't be able to understand the value of the expert. The only way the expert can show their value and make all the other stakeholders understand is by making it simple. And when they make it simple, everybody can understand, everybody can see into the future, everybody can understand the value of that expert vendor. In order to make it simple, the expert vendor will have to use performance metrics. Why is this? Because human beings, although they may be highly trained or memorize a lot of details, Human beings, by nature, are not experts in what the expert is doing. They cannot see into the future. They cannot understand unless you make it simple by using metrics. And the performance metrics have two great requirements. The first, it has to be observable. If people can't observe it, they don't believe it. Then the second requirement, if people can't count it, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of these, it stresses their brain because they're not an expert in this area. So anything that they can quickly believe has to be observable and has to be countable. And this is the future of the FM professionals in the age of automation and artificial intelligence. They need to learn how to identify the expert and utilize their expertise. Instead of doing their work themselves as far as being the expert and managing, directing, controlling, this adds no value. This is the first thing that they're going to lose any value off of, is when the experts and an automated system comes in, they lose all their value. They need to become part of the C-suite. They need to be able to see into the future. They need to be able to add amazing value, and they need to make it simple. If they can identify and utilize expertise, my message to the FM professionals, I hope they're really old, because in the next couple years, if they're old, they can survive and retire. But the young FM professionals will not have the same environment. They will have to add tremendous value. Just by observation, we look around. When an automated system comes in, it makes the expert actually more expert. It helps them to see more things and do more things. And this is really obvious. Automation always minimizes risk. And it minimizes risk because it minimizes the need to think, to make decisions, and to act. The automation reduces the need to think and make decisions. So right away, as you look around and see what's happening, automation makes it easier, makes it faster, and minimizes the need for human interaction in delivering any service. And this is happening at an exponential speed. Everywhere you look, automation is kicking in. And the information you get back is simple, straightforward, does not need, quote, an understanding of what's happening. And wherever human tasks can be minimized, they're using robots. Even very risky or perceived risky functions are being automated, which means we need fewer people. We don't need them at site because we have the technology that does all that. You know, this is from a couple years back. In the competitive world, people were thinking, well, if we reduce the cost of labor, we can compete and we can minimize the need to invest. You might hear a few little feet behind me as I have a household of little kids running around the house. But as much as they tried to compete with the automation. The decision has been made in the country with the most, quote, labor and the cheapest labor, that depending on labor, which is thinking, decision-making, repetitive nature of things, to compete, it's too risky. The deviation it's too great. And deviation is always risk. So instead of seeing humans in a line, each doing a task down an assembly line, they're looking at space. They're looking at reducing the number of human beings on the line. And they always want to increase production and increase quality. Amazingly, artificial intelligence actually replaces the human cognitive process. In other words, where the human being used to pre-plan, used to prioritize, then used to set a schedule and achieve the tasks, this can all be done now with artificial intelligence. We saw an update on PBS recently that in a certain city, whereas 5 years ago, they would probably employ 7,000 workers using robotics as an assist. Today in that same city, that same facility, instead of 7,000 people, the maximum number of people that they can employ is 700 people. It's like a 10-to-1. They've replaced the human beings, quote, with robots and with what they consider artificial intelligence. Now, what exactly is artificial intelligence? The best way I can put it is the AI is the brains of automation. So the AI can now replace the human cognitive process of planning, prioritizing, minimizing the risk in tasks. And it can also learn by collecting and using more data. So the brain becomes a little more refined. So AI or automation, I do not think that you can separate the two. One is just the processing, utilizing the computer technology. And the automation is really the doing of all the human tasks, which is quite interesting because before we'd look at a task and say, why is somebody doing that task over and over and over? Let's replace it with a robot. But today's AI and automation looks at the entire project, can actually break up the project into tasks and then attack each task when it's simplistic enough to do it by, quote, a robot. And anything now that's based on quantitative or qualitative analytical processes that can be measured and repeated, it is really the prime target of AI and automation in the future. Amazingly, this is, quote, the professional's job, the white-collar job. This is what they're looking at, because what professionals are is they go and get educated in a certain area. After they get educated, they try to get minimal experience that they can actually apply that education. Then they take some type of certification tests And after they get the education, the minimal experience, and the certification exam, they're now considered professionals. Well, what's going on now is it's these professionals' jobs that are being targeted by the artificial intelligence and the automation, which is different than 5 to 10 years ago. Yeah, this is one of my favorite videos and continues to be one of my favorites, simply because you see the bricklayer. And I just read about this in a news article from the UK. And they're trying to figure out how they're going to, quote, lay all these bricks for new facilities and the facades. And basically in this picture, what you see is you see a robot that works like much, much faster than a human being and never gets tired. But the most amazing thing is it still has a human being in the video, in the actual activity. And the reason it still has a human being is it costs too much to do the finishing work. Therefore, that, quote, human operator now becomes an expert in finishing. And that expert has to keep up with the robot. Amazingly, that expert's value in this automated age actually goes up. They'll actually get paid more simply because their expertise is required. So whatever can't be automated now becomes identified as expertise of an expert. And it doesn't matter what it is. In this case study, a group of students who knew nothing about cooking chose to automate a restaurant, automated the functions, then called the expert in and asked the expert to rate the results of their automation. And the expert said, oh my goodness, it never gets burned. It never gets cooked too long. It's amazing. And he saw no difference between what he would do as a 2-star chef and the automated restaurant. And it goes far beyond that because anytime now information is required. Another case study of a restaurant, what they did was when people came in and ordered their food, of course, the automation or the information system can remember who they are, what combination of meals they enjoy. And the next time someone comes in, all they have to do is put in their name and what they enjoy and what drinks they like. The whole meal comes up as a menu item. It's simply amazing. So basically now what the restaurant could do is what no human being can do. In fast food, in moving people in and out, the automation can remember who each individual is and what they like and what type of, quote, menu items and combinations they like. Give it to them, allow them to quickly click on it, and in 1 to 2 minutes, actually put out very tasty and healthy food. Well, this idea of replacing the human's thinking and decision making has been around for a while. And of all people, the Dutch, they're always trying to identify the value of things and running experiments on this. So basically what they did, they wanted to identify the value of someone in procurement, so a procurement professional. If they had 20 years experience with all the data on these case studies, they built a simple computer model and they said, let's see how well these professionals, by using their experience, can do on this, quote, test. Of course, the professionals are now competing against the computer. And they wanted another benchmark, something other than a computer. So they picked college freshmen, students who are brand new, no exposure to industry, don't know anything. And they're going to compete, the professional with 20 years experience against a student who knows nothing, against a computer. The first thing they realized is they had far too much information. So they wanted to delete a lot of the information. So they had a simple computer model that didn't use all the information that normally professionals have at their fingertips. And so they developed this model and they ran the competition. And the results were, if a perfect score is 0, the computer was the best. Amazingly, the students who knew nothing actually performed better than the professionals. This is an eye-opener. What this is proposing, and really this test was done so far ahead of, quote, when the technology can kick in to try to do the same thing. But what he was saying is, professionals depended too much on their experience. They did too much thinking, too much using of information, and too much decision making. Of course, because this happened many years ago, this was a frightening, quote, result. And normally what happens to these, quote, disruptive results that look into the future, and this was 20 years ago, they hide it where nobody's ever going to see it because it's disruptive. What it says is, with minimized information and using logic, with very little experience, we could do much better. Now we had to go dig this out because they put it where the sun never shines. This is what we consider disruptive technology. The only reason I propose it now is this is no longer disruptive because this is reality now. This is what AI and automation is being used for. Now, if we can look at this simply, if we find people who are very observant, just like the computer model said, these people can actually, before you do anything, for example, if I was to run 100 tests of releasing this water bottle, somebody who understands the law of gravity could simply say, every time I release it, it's going to fall. They don't have to think about this. They are actually predicting the future. They know the initial conditions, and before the test actually happens, they actually can see the final conditions. So they can tell the difference between today and what's going to happen when I release this water bottle today. In other words, they can see into the future. When people can see into the future, they need less information, they make fewer decisions because they realize that any event with initial conditions and final conditions that is governed by natural law can only happen one way. And they can see the way that it's going to happen. These people are visionaries. They're experts because they can tell the difference. They can see the difference between the initial conditions and the final conditions so they can see into the future. And in realizing that very few people who can see into the future, especially the stakeholders they have to work with, they realize if they can't make it simple, where people can just observe and count so that they can also appreciate the value of the visionary, the expert or the observant person, the observant person realizes that they'll be wasting their time. In other words, if we take the extreme of the observant person to non-observant people, who by observation are more numerous, and by observation do not, quote, have the practices of the observant person, the expert, they need more information. They like to think. They like to make decisions. They ask for more information. They can't tell the difference between an expert and a non-expert. So what they're going to do is they're going to tell the expert what to do, or the non-expert, or anybody who they consider can do the job. And in their system, there is no difference because they can't tell the difference. That is why they do this to the expert. Whereas if they're an expert and you cut this out and didn't say anything, but just let them observe the situation, anybody who is not an expert would quickly be identified as a non-expert. But the non-observant people can't do this. And therefore, the experts realized the only way to help the non-observant people get results like the observant people is to bring in automation. Bring in the automation, which minimizes the need for the non-observant people to think, to make decisions on what's going to happen. And everything is laid out simply, where they can see it and they can count it. We can now get, quote, end results as if we had an expert, if they follow the structure of this automation. Now, I've given this presentation many times, and some of the questions that come up between all the professionals is, what's he talking about? What are we automating? And the last presentation we did, which was a virtual presentation, one person turned to the other person and said, he's automating us. He's saying that the professional no longer has to know everything. No longer can they know everything. That the professional must identify and utilize expertise. And this is the only way that the professional will add tremendous value. How much value is this? We just ran a simple test, something that all FM people are interested in, janitorial service. For some reason, FMs like to talk about janitorial service. So we went in a chapter of NIGP or procurement people and said, we'll give you a free test. What do you want to run this on? And they said, janitorial service. So they went out and used this approach. They found a vendor who could tell the difference, who could see how they were going to do it and what the risk was and how they're going to mitigate the risk ahead of time, and who could make it simple. So they would know exactly what was going on by using certain performance metrics. The savings on the project, 50% over the normal cost. Staggering. Now, does everybody see this as an advantage? Does everybody realize that by doing this, that the professional now can increase their value? No, we realize that many people are frightened by this, quote, potential. Minimizing the humanistic functions and maximizing what a visionary can see. and being able to predict the future. Well, as people try to transition into this new paradigm, it's so hard. Because if there's an expert around who knows how to do this, there is always somebody who's a non-expert who's trying to maintain the status quo for the simple reason that they fear for their job. They actually have a different agenda. It's not that they mean to do it, it's they can't see. They're not an expert. And whenever you collaborate with experts, somebody comes in and they're different. When somebody's different like this, nothing changes. And everybody keeps doing the same thing. So they think they can mitigate risk by outsourcing FM, which is ridiculous. Can't be done that way. And it's caused by the non-expert. Because when they actually see what experts can do, they're afraid. They can't see that their value now is understood by everyone. So what we must do, logically, we must create an environment where they can fly, where the experts can do their work, which means we minimize the need for the expert or the non-expert, which means the experts come in, they can see into the future, they can tell the difference between the beginning and the end, and they make it simple, so simple, because it's countable and it's observable. And that is the definition of transparency. This is what experts do. And the system designed actually allows the experts to come in and easily, by observation, the FM professionals should be able to identify and utilize expertise. We've seen this in nature. How do you get the capability of some of these animals in nature to do what they do? Is there a manual on this? Can one bird teach another bird how to do this? We now can go all over the world and see things that we were never able to see before. Everybody thought that a dolphin could not jump 20 feet unless you went to a SeaWorld park and you had a trainer and he's making the dolphin jump 20 feet in the air by, quote, influencing him with a fish as a reward. Now we know because we can go worldwide and we have the technology to capture these animals doing this in the wild on their own. And it's amazing. Some people agree with what these animals are doing, some people don't agree, but I can tell you one thing, it's reality that every entity has expertise. And to write a manual is not the way. To manage, direct, and control, it's not the way. The way to do this is to identify an environment and allow the experts to show us what their expertise is. So we can now look at the FM professional and the FM associate in a totally different light. The FM professional becomes an information worker. The, quote, FM associate becomes the expert vendor. And this expert vendor is going to utilize this system of information and automation to communicate back to the FM professional. Now, why does this make sense? Over 25 years, we've tested this out. One person can do the work of 10. All they have to do is utilize this simplistic system to identify and utilize expertise. And the FM associates who are doing the work now can, quote, act as the expert. They do the quality control. They do the risk mitigation. All the FM professional has to do is ensure that he's running this automated approach. Now we hear over and over, we have all these FM jobs. We don't have anybody to fill, quote, these future FM jobs. I'm proposing that we may not need as many FMs as we've needed in the past. It depends if the owners, the C-suite, can finally figure out that all they want is better services for less money, and they want tremendously more value. Like, if they realized that the FM services, the cost can be drastically cut, and yet they can get better value, and that there are FM professionals who can not only do what they do, but they can service everything. This is the amazing part. This is what the automation will bring. So really the future of FM professionals is merely quality assurance. It's merely getting that information and being able to pass that to the FM professionals. How do we communicate in numbers? Simple. We go back to the definition. If somebody's a non-expert, how do they identify and communicate a requirement? Every metric they use has to be observable and has to be countable. If it's not observable and countable, and people disagree on the metric, it shouldn't be used. If someone is an expert vendor, do they need more information or less information? They need less information because they can tell the difference. They can see into the future and they can make it simple. So the client requirement now is made on observable metrics. Then the vendors come in and compete. And the vendors say, based on that unique specific job, this is what we've done. This is the budgets on these jobs that we did. And these are the metrics that tell you that what you're asking for, we can do, because it's almost like what we've done. And we can track the time and cost deviation. And this is our customer satisfaction on your type of requirement. Quote, Mr. FM professional. Remembering that the time required to do this is drastically cut. The number of people who are needed, drastically minimized. The number of meetings, drastically reduced. The need for experience to find this expert vendor, drastically reduced. And I've heard everything like, our environment is totally unique. It's totally different. This can't work at our location. I guarantee you this can work. We've gone now to countries around the world, different cultures, different thinking, different levels of experience. And I can tell you, automation and artificial intelligence will take whatever information they have and it'll make it work, cutting the costs and delivering much higher value and quality. So automation is really a disruptive technology. It will make the FM's job so much easier. Give them the information in simplistic terms that they can take to the owners of their organization, and the owners will realize instantly, because of the metrics and it's observable. We don't need any experience to see that the value is tremendous. It's the first time ever that somebody has said we can automate the thinking, decision-making, management, the control, lower the cost, and improve the value at the same time. This is the future. This is where automation is going. In conclusion, we need to get the FM professionals. They need to increase their responsibility, but absolutely minimize their workload. And the FM associates, and I've been seeing this over the last 5 years, they're becoming a bigger and bigger part of facility services. They actually need to be the technical experts. They need to be able to tell the difference, see into the future, mitigate risk, and make everything simple so it doesn't take an expert to interpret how well they performed. Yes, we've been going around to all the chapters, but in the pandemic, it's kind of minimized our efforts. But we move now from the engineering professional to the business professional. It's more like the C-suite. And in going out to all the chapters, whether they be IFMA, PMI, NIGP, anybody now in the supply chain, and we offer them a free test. All they have to do is pick, quote, the service, and we go in there, assist them in running the service so they can actually see the results. We also have other freebies. This year we'll have a virtual conference, but it is definitely a change of paradigm. So now, that's the end. We are now open for questions or discussion, and I believe we have 10 or 15 minutes. So guys, go at it. We're virtual. There's no stupid question.
I just want to remind anyone, if they do have any questions, feel free to type them in on the control panel, and I'd be more than happy to present them over to Dr. Dean. Okay, someone is asking, how can we align procurement with these goals? Often procurement is following its own goals of technically acceptable lowest cost vendors.
Okay, that's a very good question. A lot of FMs think that procurement is the problem. But I propose to the FMs, we can actually use the traditional system that procurement uses by changing the requirements from technical to, quote, numeric metrics to identify what our requirement is. And because an expert can see into the future, and an expert can explain it simply, and they can mitigate risk, we have come up with the conclusion now that you don't need to change your procurement system. Although if your procurement system is a little more flexible, it can adapt better, quote, to the best value approach, but you don't need the best value procurement if you can change in the expression of what your requirement is and how you're going to identify, quote, the best, quote, vendor. Amazingly here, because the promise is we're going to cut the cost. Based on how our RFP is written in a non-technical way, we have found that in the majority of cases, the expert is always cheaper than all their competitors, which is staggering because we always thought it wasn't our fault as FMs. We thought it was the procurement people. Now that we run the system, we can actually, and we've tested this out, run it with the traditional procurement, award it based on the low costs. Before we award it, ensure that the vendor meets the requirements of knowing the difference, of seeing from beginning to end, identifying and mitigating risk, and tracking any project time and cost deviations. You know, we found out that you can actually run the traditional procurement and do this, which is staggering.
Great, thank you, Dr. Dean. We'll give it just another moment. Just a reminder, you can type your questions into the control panel, and also a copy of this recording will be available on the Corporate Facility Council's website, ifmacfc.org. Okay. Hold on 1 second. Looks like something just came in. Okay, please address the challenges related to the inflexibility of public sector procurement.
Okay, the last project when addressing the inflexibility of public procurement was actually run for a client who was in the public sector in the state of Colorado. And we met all their requirements, and it ended up that they identified a vendor at 50% of what they normally paid for janitorial service. And they were extremely pleased at how they didn't have to make any decisions and ended up with that vendor. So we would have to look at the individual case, but we have found out that public procurement is not as inflexible as everybody was thinking it was. But it was the way that the FM would identify what their requirement is and how they would put it in the quote, either RFP or request for bids. But we're willing on either way to run a test with any one of the clients who are the FM professionals if we have the guarantee that we can have full access to the information. So after the test is run, we can write it up and document it so it would help the rest of the industry.
Great, thank you. And another question here is, what advice do you have for dealing with existing vendors under existing contracts who are not contracted with best value? Should we try and change them, or should we wait and rebid?
Good question. What I would probably do is to wait until you can rebid it, and hopefully it's soon, and have them compete along with anybody else. Simply because the problem that we have here is not only, quote, the FM's problem with their organization, having a, quote, non-performing or a vendor who needs to be told and managed on everything. The problem actually extends into the vendors. And I can show this very quickly. If, for example, you want, quote, the better service, you want to employ a visionary, somebody who knows the difference, who can track, quote, the difference between the beginning and what they're going to be doing and see into the whole service period and be able to make it simple so everybody can understand exactly what they're doing. If you approach the vendor, and let's say a small vendor, and they had 5 people working in the vendor's company. It's, number 1, it's the boss. Number 2, it's the boss's son. Number 3, it's the person who's been in the company the longest. And number 4, it's a technical consultant that always seems to be available. And the 5th person is the youngest person and the person with the least experience in the company, less than a year. But in less than a year, everybody in that small company realizes if they have a problem, they can go to this, quote, young person, and this young person will listen to them and quickly identify what the problem is, how to solve it, and can, quote, make it simple, where the person who came with the problem just goes and does it, and it worked. So these 5 people now are in this vendor organization, and the vendor gets word that there's this very important client who wants to, quote, go to the best value approach or identify and utilize expertise. And they only want to talk to the experts. They don't want to talk to marketing people. They don't want to talk to people who don't know what they're doing. So this company now that I just explained to you who the players are, here's this. And the question is, who is going to show up at the first education meeting to meet the client? Is it the boss? Is it his son? Is it the guy who's been around the longest? Is it the guy who's always available? Or is it the new guy who can solve any problem, even though his experience is limited? The problem the boss now has is one that's of a human nature type problem. If he quickly says they want an expert, if he had no, quote, humanistic biases and relationships going on in his organization, he'd quickly send this guy. But if he did that, what is he going to tell his own son? I don't trust you. You're not valuable enough. You don't understand. What is he going to tell the guy who has 30 years in the company, who knows everything about the company? You can see the problem that this vendor has. Because even in his own company, the vendor does not have a system set up to identify and utilize expertise. Oh my goodness. And as you run this and you test it out, you'll see that you can't change a vendor. The expert will probably be somebody who's not on your job. And so it's better to wait if you can and start education with the vendor, telling them how the next project is going to be competed. So hopefully that helped you.
Great, thank you very much. And that was actually our last question. And we are actually exactly at the end of the hour. So perfect timing, Dr. Dean.
Fantastic, thanks.
I want to thank everyone for attending today. And I want to thank Dr. Dean for a very informative presentation. Everyone have a great rest of the day. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.